I think I look at the fact that we're not able to reach people, and I think it's because we've lost sight of sin is sin. I remember Billy Graham said, a little rock will go to the bottom of the lake just as much as a big rock will. What we consider to be a little sin will go to the bottom of the lake just as quick as what we consider to be a big sin. I remember I was preaching in a church in a community that had 2,000 people in it. This was years ago. And the pastor looked at me, and the pastor said to me, he said, you know, we went out and did the evangelist pastor thing after service. We went out to dinner, and it was late at night, which I usually don't like to do, but I did it this night because I just wanted to go and just spend time with the pastor. I'd just flown in that afternoon, was flying out the next morning, and the pastor just said, man, I'm really, really going through it. And I said, oh, really? What's going on? He said, well, I'm getting a lot of persecution from the city. And I said, really? What's going on? He said, well, I've told everybody in my congregation. Now, you got to understand, this is like 10, 15 years ago, okay? He said, if there's a homosexual that works for a institution, boycott the institution. So in other words, if there's a waiter that's a homosexual, if there's a guy that works in the store as a clerk, don't go there. And I looked at the pastor and I said, oh, so why don't we tell everybody not to shop where a guy that looks at pornography, or a guy who lied to his wife, or somebody who disrespected their parents? I said, your people aren't going to be able to go anywhere. And he kind of got a little upset, but I was furious. I was like, why have you singled this out as the big sin? See, that's what I'm talking about in categorizing sins. And you know what's really interesting? I mean, the Lord really used this. 6 months later, I was in a church, and we had a move of God that lasted a whole week. It was only supposed to be a couple of nights, and this is back 10, 15 years. It was actually about 15 years ago when I used to actually stay a little longer. Nowadays, I don't do that, but I remember we were just going to do, I think it was a 2-night set of meetings, and we ended up going like all week. And in that week, I remember there was this guy who came up to me at the end of a service. Everybody was kind of talking in fellowship and walking out. The church was packed out, and the guy said, would you pray for me? And I said, sure. And when I prayed for him, literally, this is amazing, the presence of God hit this guy so strong that I didn't even get to say goodbye to him. He was so touched by the presence of God, right? So a month later, a call comes into my office, and I get the call, and it's this guy. And he said, hey, my name is J.R. And he said, you probably don't remember me. I said, oh, yeah, I remember. You came up to me when I was in Alabama, and on the second night of the last services, you came up to me right at the end of the service and said, pray for me. He said, yeah, you do remember me. He said, well, you just don't know about me. And I said, well, tell me about you. And he just goes off on a tangent, right, for another 10 minutes. And he says, if you only knew about my life. I said, tell me about your life. And he goes off on another tangent for another 10 minutes. And then he says, if you just knew about my life. I said, hey, JR, stop. Stop right there. I said, JR, tell me about your life, or we're not going any farther on this phone call. And he goes, I'm a homosexual. I said, I know. He said, you do? I said, yeah, I knew when I prayed for you, you were a homosexual. He said, what'd you think, that pervert? And I said, no, JR. I said, let me tell you something. I was a successful young man. I was on the dean's list at Purdue. I played varsity tennis at Purdue. I was a sorority boy. I loved girls. I was bound to pornography. But you know what? I didn't know Jesus, and I was headed straight to the hell you are heading to right now, and I would have burned right next to you. And he went, what? I said, oh yeah, I would have been burning right next to you had Jesus not saved me. And I began to share with him the gospel, and he started listening. And you know, I prayed with him to get saved. I prayed for him to be delivered from homosexuality and to be saved. And he got saved right on the phone call, right? So the pastor of this Alabama church comes to Orlando, where we lived at the time, and played golf with me about 6 months later. And we're playing golf, and the pastor said, John, do you remember this guy named JR? I said, oh, yeah, he called my office 6 months ago, and I prayed for him to get saved and delivered from homosexuality. He said, did he? He said, John, this guy is on fire. He sits in the front row. He's bringing the prostitutes, the pimps, and the homosexuals from all over the city, and they're getting saved like crazy in my church. I said, oh, man, that's so great to hear. See, that's the thing we got to remember. Sin is sin, and Jesus gave his life for us to be free from sin, which includes unforgiveness.